She had exactly
Move 'em
three
out.
hours,
Get
$14,
along
or the county would take everything her father ever built. She had $4.40. The only thing she owned worth the difference was standing in the paddock with his nose pressed into her shoulder, the horse her father had given her with his own hands. The one thing in the world that still felt like family. Montana Territory, 1887. Adeline Foster was about to ride 12 minutes to the one man her dying father told her to trust, and sell the only thing she had left to save a life she'd already given everything to keep. What she didn't know is that the man on the other end of that ride had been quietly watching her for 14 months, and what he was about to offer her instead of a sale would either save her or cost them both a great deal more than $14. Stay with this one to the end, because the man who's about to come back into their lives isn't finished causing trouble, not by a long way. Adeline Foster had counted the hours from the moment Elias Thorne came to her door that morning, the second morning in a row, and told her, with the patience of a man who prefers not to repeat himself, that the amount was $14, and if it wasn't on his desk before sundown, he'd file with the county office first thing the next morning. Once that process began, the legal fees stacked onto the debt. He would not stop the sale. $14. She had $4.40 after selling the last of the autumn preserves that morning, after the embroidery she delivered to a neighbor on Tuesday, after 3 shirts finished by lamplight on Wednesday with her eyes burning from the strain. 440 was not 14. She'd stood in the yard after Thorne left, looking at the small property her father had worked 22 years, the house, the barn, the half-dozen chickens. The kitchen garden going brown at the edges for lack of time to tend it, and understood, with the clear, cold understanding that comes when you've run out of alternatives, that there was one thing left. Liberty was in the paddock. The white horse lifted his head when she walked over, pushed his nose into her shoulder the way he had since he was 2 years old, when her father brought him home and said, "This one's for you, Addie. He'll take care of you. I can't, not forever." Her father had been dead 14 months. Liberty had been taking care of her since. Her father had taught her to keep the farm ledger before he taught her to saddle a horse. Land is lost more often through bad arithmetic than bad weather, he used to say. She'd run the arithmetic 3 times. It came out the same each time. She stood at the paddock fence and held Liberty's nose against her shoulder and didn't pretend the numbers would change. They would not change. She needed $10 she didn't have, and she had one thing worth more than $10, and she was going to sell it to the one person she trusted to treat it correctly. Her father had told her in the last month of his life, with the practicality of a man who knew he was leaving things unfinished, "If you ever have to let Liberty go, take him to Caleb Whitmore. He knows horses, he's a fair man, he'll treat the animal right." He'd said it once, clearly, without repetition. She'd remembered it 14 months without needing it. She needed it now. She went inside and got her coat. Edward Foster had left his daughter a small property and a large set of skills, 40 acres on the east side of the valley, not the best land, not the worst. The kind that produced enough if you worked it correctly. Enough for one man and a daughter and a horse named Liberty, not enough for one woman alone. This wasn't something Adeline had understood when her father died. She'd understood it gradually over 14 months, the way you understand things that arrive without announcement, first as a suspicion, then as arithmetic that wouldn't come out right. She'd tried everything, sewed a shirt in 3 hours when the light was good, sold to the larger ranches for fair wages. Sold preserves and cured meats at the Stonebridge Market on Saturdays, delivering it all herself on Liberty. Who was the reason delivery was possible, and who ate feed that cost money she didn't quite have? The debt had started small in the week after her father's funeral, when she needed money for property taxes, the feed bill, and a barn roof that couldn't wait for winter. She'd borrowed $22 from Elias Thorne, at terms that had seemed reasonable until she understood them fully. She'd been paying down the principal with the patience of someone moving a large rock 1 inch at a time. She'd missed one payment in September when a mare kicked over her sewing basket and she lost 4 days of work to a sprained wrist. She'd missed another last week. That morning, Thorne had come in person. She'd listened on the porch, hands still floury from bread she'd been making when he knocked. She hadn't argued because there was nothing to argue with. The terms were the terms and she'd signed them. The remaining principal was $8. With interest and the penalty for a second late notice, the total came to $14. When he left, she'd gone back inside and finished the bread because the bread needed finishing. 12 loaves stacked on the kitchen table. She'd stood there with the smell of fresh bread in the air and the weight of $9.60 of difference sitting on her chest. Then she'd gone to get her coat. The Whitmore Ranch was 12 minutes from the Foster property on horseback, 12 minutes that covered, in most respects, the distance between two entirely different operations. 500 acres of the best valley land, a main house solid and larger than necessary, the largest private barn in the county. Cattle visible from the road, a constant moving presence across the south pasture. Caleb Whitmore had inherited the operation at 28, 6 years back, and had managed it by the simple method of working harder than anyone else and asking good questions of people who knew more than he did. He'd known Adeline's father the way good neighbors know each other, shared fence line, shared respect, occasional conversation at the Stonebridge market. He'd watched the Foster property from that distance 14 months. He hadn't interfered because Edward Foster's daughter was clearly capable and clearly proud, and interfering with capable. Proud people was the kind of thing that ended neighborly relationships permanently. He told himself this more than once, watching the lamp burn late in the Foster house from the ridge above. Adeline rode Liberty to the Whitmore gate at 2:30. Caleb was in the corral working a young sorrel, patient work, the kind that required the horse to understand it was being asked rather than told. He saw her at the gate, read something in the way she sat straight, the way you sit when you're managing something, and handed the sorrel's lead to Jessie before walking over. Jessie watched him go with the expression of a man filing an observation for future reference. Caleb took off his hat at the gate. Adeline, Caleb, she'd rehearsed 3 versions of what she was going to say. I need to sell Liberty. None of the rehearsed versions had started like that. He looked at Liberty. He looked at her, he said nothing, which was the right thing. It gave her the space she needed to get through it. Elias Thorne is calling the debt today, before sundown. I'm short $960 and I have nothing left to sell except him. She held his gaze. My father said if I ever had to let him go, to bring him to you. He said you'd treat him right. Caleb looked at Liberty a long moment. The white horse watched him back with the calm attention of an animal taking a thorough measurement. How much do you need? $10. That covers the gap and gets me through the month. She held her chin level. I know what he's worth. I know $10 isn't it. But it's what I need, and it's what I'm asking. Caleb Whitmore looked at this woman at his gate on a Monday afternoon and thought about 14 months of a lamp burning late from the Foster Ridge. And a man who'd once told him, not as a suggestion, as a statement of fact, that his daughter was the most capable person on either side of their shared fence line. He put his hat back on. Come inside, he said. We need to talk about something other than a sale. She followed him because there was no better option available. He held the door. She sat at the kitchen table, her legs more tired than she'd acknowledged on the ride over. He made coffee. She didn't refuse it. She looked around the kitchen while it came to temperature. The pantry was organized by someone who understood ranching but not provisioning bulk supplies in the wrong order. No system for rotation, flour stored next to kerosene, which was a fire risk and simply wrong. She filed this and looked back at the table. You're short $960, he said. Yes, and the remaining principal after you pay today is $8. Monthly payments too. Yes. He sat across from her, drank his coffee. Went still in the way she recognized from the Stonebridge market, the way he went when he was calculating something he intended to get right. I'm not looking for charity, she said. I know that. I'm not offering charity. He held her gaze. I'm looking for someone who can manage the household operation here, the accounts, the provisions, the scheduling. My housekeeper left in August. I've got 5 men and no system for anything that happens inside this house. He looked at the pantry, which she'd already assessed. Position pays $3 a week. You'd keep your own property. Ride over daily or stay here depending on the week's work. She looked at him. That's a fair wage for that work. A pause. If I take it, I cover Thorn today out of an advance and I'm clear of the deficit in 3 weeks. Yes, I'll advance you 10 against the first wages. You pay Thorn. You keep Liberty, he can work from here. Better paddock, better feed. He held her gaze. That is a practical arrangement that benefits both parties. She looked at the kitchen, the pantry, this man who'd known her father, who'd watched 14 months of a lamp burning late without once coming to the door. Why didn't you come before? He looked at his cup. Because you didn't ask. And because your father told me once you had more pride than good sense, which he meant as the highest compliment he knew how to give. He held her gaze. I respected that. I respected it too long, maybe. I'd rather give you both a home, he said. The position and the paddock for Liberty, that's not charity. That's a practical arrangement. She sat in Caleb Whitmore's kitchen with $4.40 to her name and 2 hours until sundown. She thought about her father. Take him to Caleb Whitmore. He'll treat the animal right. She'd thought he meant the horse. All right, she said. I'll take the position. He stood. I'll get the 10. She paid Elias Thorne $14.40. He received it with the expression of a man who'd expected a different outcome. She didn't explain where it had come from. She walked back to Liberty and put her forehead against his and stood there a moment in the Stonebridge late afternoon. Then she rode home, made supper, and went to bed. She started at the Whitmore Ranch Wednesday. The house accounts were a disaster, not from negligence, but from the accumulated disorder of a busy man who understood cattle and had no system for anything that happened inside 4 walls. She spent the first day taking inventory, the second building a system. Friday afternoon, Jessie came into the kitchen where she was reorganizing the pantry and stopped in the doorway. Sugar was where I could find it, he said. She looked at him. The sugar was stored next to the kerosene. I knew where it was. It was also a fire hazard. Jessie looked at the new location of the sugar, looked at her, looked at the sugar again. Caleb, no, you moved everything. Caleb hired me to manage the house. The pantry is in the house. Jessie leaned against the doorframe with the expression of a man who just witnessed something he intended to remember. You've been here 3 days, he said. The pantry needed attention on day 1. I was being patient. He nodded slowly. Caleb's going to notice. Good. Jessie went back outside, found Caleb at the south pasture fence and said without preamble, new housekeeper moved the sugar. Caleb looked at him. Is that a problem? Jessie considered it. No, he went back to work. That evening, when Caleb came in for supper and couldn't immediately locate the flour, he stood in the kitchen doorway and said nothing. Because Adeline was at the stove and the kitchen smelled like fresh bread, and he understood, in the specific way of a man who's been eating his own cooking for 6 years, that this was better. And the flour question could wait. She told him about the overpayments on Friday. She'd been expecting a reaction. She wasn't sure which kind. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the figures she'd laid out. 3 suppliers, 6 months. $11.40 in overpayments, with the expression of a man reading something he wishes he'd known sooner and is trying not to show it. You found this in 3 days. The filing system had room for improvement. How much room? Considerable room. She looked at the ledger. My father taught me to keep the farm books before he taught me to saddle a horse. He said land was lost more often through bad arithmetic than bad weather. Caleb looked at the figures. Looked at her, said something she hadn't expected. He said that about you. She looked at him. About me specifically, the last time I spoke to your father. He looked at the ledger. About a month before he died, he said the Foster farm would survive him because Adeline kept better books than he did. He held her gaze. I thought he meant it as comfort. I'm beginning to think he meant it as information. Adeline looked at the ledger and thought about a man who'd kept the farm books and the fence line and the horse and the last instruction all in the same careful part of his mind. She thought about 14 months of managing alone. She thought about $11.40. I've written to the 3 suppliers, she said. You should have corrections by month's end. Caleb looked at the figures once more. $3 a week, he said. Is that still the agreed rate? It's what you offered. It's not enough. For what you're doing here, she held his gaze. We agreed on 3, we can renegotiate. Caleb, she said, don't change the terms. She held his gaze. I need to know what the terms are. He understood what she meant, that she needed the arrangement to stay what it was until she understood what else it might become. He nodded. $3, he said, as agreed. He went back to the cattle. She went back to the ledger. Jesse, working on a harness in the next room and hearing all of it, said nothing. He went outside and made a mental note. What none of them knew that Friday was that Elias Thorne was, at that exact hour, sitting in his own office in Stonebridge, going back through his ledger with a different kind of arithmetic in mind. Thorne had not liked the way that $14 payment had arrived, cash, exact, from a woman he'd been certain would be selling her horse to some buyer he could quietly steer toward himself, at a price low enough to leave her still owing him something. Instead, she'd walked out with a clean account and a horse still in her possession, and Thorne, who'd built a comfortable business on people not having anywhere else to turn, did not care for the implication that Adeline Foster had, in fact, found somewhere else to turn. He rode out to the Whitmore ranch himself in the second week of December, papers in hand, and found Caleb at the barn. Whitmore, Thorne said, not dismounting. I have reason to believe the Foster debt was settled with funds that originated as an advance against future wages, which, under the terms of the original note, constitutes a third-party guarantee. That changes the nature of the debt considerably. I'd like to discuss revised terms. Caleb set down the tool in his hand and looked at him for a long moment. There's no third-party guarantee in an employer paying an employee an advance on wages already owed for work already agreed to. You know that as well as I do, Thorne. I know what a judge in Cedar County might be persuaded to believe, given time and the right framing. Thorne's voice stayed even, almost pleasant. I'd rather not spend either of our time in court. A small settlement now, say $6, and I forget I ever had the thought. That's not a legal claim, Caleb said. That's a threat dressed up as paperwork. Call it what you like. Thorne looked past him toward the house where Adeline had just stepped onto the porch, having heard the horse and come to see who'd arrived. I could just as easily take the matter directly to Miss Foster. She's the one whose name is actually on the original note, after all. I imagine she'd rather settle quietly than have her new employer's business dragged through a Cedar County courtroom on her account. Adeline came down the porch steps, her expression giving away nothing. Mr. Thorne, she said, I paid what was owed in full with money I earned. If you have a genuine claim, take it to the county. If you don't, I'd ask you to get off Mr. Whitmore's land. Thorne looked between the two of them, the rancher with 500 acres standing solid at the barn door, the woman who'd once stood at his own counter with barely enough coins to cover her debt and now stood on someone else's porch with nothing in her voice but flat certainty. He'd built his whole business on finding people with no other option. He understood, watching the two of them, that whatever leverage he'd hoped to find here had already been spent the day Adeline Foster rode through this gate with a horse she didn't actually have to sell. I'll be in touch, Thorne said, which both of them understood to mean he wouldn't be, and rode off. Caleb watched him go. You didn't need me to say any of that, he said. No, Adeline agreed. But I noticed you were ready to before I got a word out. Habit, Caleb said. A good one, she said, and went back inside to finish the bread. December came to Montana territory the way it always came, without negotiation. The lower fence rails disappeared. Adeline's 12-minute ride became 40 minutes of careful work through Drift's Liberty, navigated with the patience of an animal that had done harder things. On the third day of it, Caleb said without particular ceremony that the east bedroom was unused, and it made no practical sense for her to ride 40 minutes in the dark when the work was here. She moved into the east bedroom. She told herself it was practical. She told herself this every morning, sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee before the house was awake, watching the Montana dark turn gray, then the particular blue of a winter morning, listening for the specific creak of the third floorboard in the hallway that meant Caleb was up. She knew he took his coffee black. She knew he read at the kitchen table for 20 minutes every morning before going out, and that on mornings when something was worrying him, he read the same page twice without noticing. There'd been more second reads in December than in November. One evening she found him in the barn after supper working on a harness by lamplight. Not unusual. What was unusual was the object on the workbench beside him, a leather-handled tool, old, repaired multiple times, used carefully and repaired again. She recognized the mark stamped into the handle before she recognized anything else. That was his. Caleb looked at the tool, then at her. He lent it to me 4 years ago. I kept meaning to return it. He turned it over. After he died, I thought. He stopped, looked at the lamp. I kept it because it was the last thing he lent me. I should have brought it to you. I didn't know how. She stood in the barn doorway in the December cold, looking at a tool she'd last seen in her father's hand. Thinking about a man who'd known Caleb Whitmore well enough to lend him something and trust it would come back. She crossed the barn, took the tool from his hands, looked at it and gave it back. Keep it, she said. He'd want it used. He talked about you, Caleb said, often. Every time I saw him, she looked at the lamp. Outside, December was dark and cold and entirely unhurried. She went back inside and didn't examine too closely what she was feeling, the specific warmth of a place that had started, somewhere between November and December, to feel like hers. The first Monday of January, Adeline rode to Stonebridge to pay the monthly installment on the Thorn debt, $2 exact, in an envelope prepared Sunday evening. She set it on the counter. The clerk looked at it, looked at his ledger, looked at her with the expression of a man whose information doesn't match what's in front of him. Miss Foster. The account was settled. She looked at him. What? In full, January 15th. Payment of $8 against the full remaining principal. He turned the ledger toward her, pointed to the entry. Accounts closed. Adeline looked at the entry. January 15th, she'd been at the Whitmore Ranch that day, spending the morning on the provision schedule and the afternoon on a broken wheel spoke Jessie couldn't fix correctly. She looked at the payment line, Caleb Whitmore. She folded her own envelope, put it back in her pocket, thanked the clerk, and walked out onto the Stonebridge street. She stood on the boardwalk a moment. The Montana January was cold and entirely indifferent to what she was feeling. She thought about a Monday afternoon in November. That is a practical arrangement that benefits both parties. She thought about $3 a week and don't change the terms. She thought about $11.40 in overpayments and a leather-handled tool on a workbench. She thought about her father talking about her every time he saw Caleb. She thought about $8 paid on January 15th without a word to her. And a man on horseback threatening them both in December who'd been sent off without Caleb once raising his voice, and then, apparently, quietly finishing the job Thorn had started. Without telling her that either. She got on Liberty. She rode back to the Whitmore Ranch. She didn't decide what she was going to say. She decided only that she was going to say it before she found a reason not to. He was at the south fence when she arrived. She rode to where he was, got down, stood beside him. He looked at her, read her face. You went to the lending office? Yes. He looked at the fence. Caleb, she said, it was $8. It was not. That is not the point. I know that's not the point. He looked at the mountains, then at her. I should have told you. I didn't tell you because I knew you wouldn't accept it if I asked first. A pause. I was right about that. That doesn't make it right. She was very still. I was wrong, he said. Helping you did not give me the right to decide for you. The $8 can remain alone. You can repay it through wages, or I can ask Thorn to reverse the entry and we settle it another way. You choose. Those are the options and they're all genuinely on the table. She looked at the fence. At Liberty, grazing a few yards away with the complete ease of an animal that had found a good place and knew it. That, she said, is the first thing you've said today that sounds like respect. He held her gaze. Yes, I know, I am better at solving problems than explaining them. I am working on the explaining. A pause. I am not naturally good at it. She almost smiled, not quite. Why? Because when I care about something, I tend to act instead of speak. It's a consistent failing. He held her gaze. I paid the $8 because I wasn't comfortable watching you carry it. Not because you couldn't manage it. You clearly managed things better than I managed my own accounts for 6 years, because I didn't want you to have to. He looked at his hands. That's the honest reason. I should have found a way to be honest about it at the time, instead of acting alone. The same as I should have told you Thorn rode out here in December instead of handling it and saying nothing. Her head came up. He came here, tried to claim the wage advance, made it a third-party guarantee, threatened to take it to you directly if I didn't pay him off. Caleb's jaw was tight. I should have told you that too. You had every right to handle it yourself, the way you handled him at your own door in November. I keep doing the same thing, deciding for you because I can't stand watching you carry something alone. It's not a kindness if I don't tell you I'm doing it. She stood at the fence in the February cold and looked at a man who'd paid $8 and faced down a man with threats and papers and said nothing about either for weeks, and had just offered her genuine options and admitted a consistent failing without decoration. Give me until Sunday, she said, not to decide whether I care for you. I know whether I care for you. She held his gaze. To decide whether I can trust you with that knowledge. He nodded. No argument, no persuasion. Sunday, he said. She got on Liberty. She rode home. Behind her, Jesse, who'd been checking the east fence and heard most of it, waited until she was gone, then walked over. April, Jesse said. Caleb looked at him. What? I'm betting April. For the proposal, he went back to work. She came back Sunday, not with an answer ready, with the answer she'd already known and had spent 3 days deciding she could trust. He was on the porch when she rode in, which meant he'd been watching for her, which she noted. She tied Liberty at the post and walked to the porch and sat on the step. He sat beside her. They looked at the Montana February, the snow on the lower pastures, the mountains, Liberty visible at the post with the patience of an animal that had long since decided where it belonged. The $8, she said, I'll repay it through wages, 2 a month until it's settled. All right, and you ask me next time? Yes, he said, I will. She looked at Liberty. My father knew you, she said. He trusted you with his tool and his horse and his last instruction. She held his gaze. I've been trying to understand what he knew that I didn't. A pause. I think I understand it now. He looked at her with the direct eyes that had always been honest. What did he know? That you solve problems before you explain them, she said. And that you're working on the explaining. She held his gaze. He also knew I have more pride than good sense, which means I need someone who will be honest with me even when I don't want to hear it. You were honest on Friday and about Thorn eventually, that mattered. He looked at Liberty, then at her. Adeline, yes, I would like to court you, he said properly. I know, she said. I'll let you, she almost smiled. He saw it. But Caleb, yes, next time you want to do something for me, ask me first. Yes, he said. I will. They sat on the porch in the February cold, and Liberty lifted his head from the post and looked at them both, then went back to waiting. Because he'd known since November how this was going to go. March came to Montana territory with the relief of something that's been away too long. The snow pulled back, the creek ran high. Liberty moved through the early green with the enthusiasm of a horse that had been waiting for exactly this since October. Caleb courted her the way he did most things, practically, without performance. He brought wildflowers once in March, with the slight discomfort of a man who knows the gesture is correct and isn't entirely sure of the execution. She put them in the window above the kitchen sink without mentioning it. He tried to tell her the dress she wore on Easter Sunday suited her. That dress suits you, he said, then, the dress. The color, only the color. He looked toward Jesse, standing near the barn door, who immediately found something to do in the other direction. Caleb looked back at Adeline. The dress suits you, he said again, which was not an improvement but was honest. She understood that this was how he operated and found it, on balance, considerably more valuable than a man who said the right things easily. On an April evening, she was making supper when Caleb came in from the south pasture with the specific quality of a man who decided something and wasn't going to wait any longer. He sat at the kitchen table, looked at his hands, looked at her. I used to think this house was quiet because I preferred it that way, he said. Now I know it was only waiting for someone whose absence I would notice. She stopped stirring, turned around. He was looking at her with the direct eyes that had been honest since November. Adeline Foster, he said, will you marry me? It wasn't a question, it was the only remaining honest statement. She walked to the table, sat across from him, put her hands on the table. He put his over them. Yes, she said simply, the way she said everything that mattered. They married in June at the Stonebridge Church on a Saturday with the Montana summer outside, the valley green from snowmelt, the mountains clear. The whole of Stonebridge came. Jesse was in the third row there since morning, which was the row a man occupied when he had a stake in the proceedings and wanted a clear view. Adeline wore a dress she'd made herself, cream linen, simple, practical enough to be worn again because she was still Adeline Foster. And Adeline Foster did not make things that could only be used once. Caleb wore his good shirt. He had one, with the slight discomfort of a man who preferred work clothes and was willing to be temporarily uncomfortable for important occasions. Before the ceremony in the small room at the back of the church where Adeline was waiting, Caleb knocked and came in with something in his hand, her father's leather-handled tool, cleaned, oiled, wrapped in a piece of cloth. He left it with me, Caleb said. It should go back to the Foster property. She held it a moment, looked at the stamp on the handle. Looked at Caleb, thought about a man who'd known this man well enough to lend him something and trust it would come back. Who'd also known him well enough to send his daughter to his gate with a horse and a price and a last instruction that meant more than its words. She handed the tool back. Keep it, she said. Between the two properties, it'll get more use. He held it. He looked at her. He said nothing because there was nothing to add to that. After the ceremony in the June afternoon, Jesse appeared at Caleb's side. April 23rd, Jesse said. I won by 7 days. You bet April. I bet before May. April 23rd is before May. That is technically a win. He held out his hand. Caleb looked at it, reached into his pocket, gave Jesse a silver dollar. Jesse accepted it with the satisfaction of a man who'd been right about something since November. You should have bet February, Caleb said. I knew February, Jesse said. I just didn't think you did. He walked away. Caleb looked across the churchyard at Adeline, standing with the Reverend's wife, laughing at something, copper hair loose in the June light, wearing the dress she'd made herself. The expression of someone who'd arrived somewhere she intended to arrive. He thought about a gate in November and a white horse and a woman who'd named a price that wasn't what the horse was worth because it was what she needed. He walked across the churchyard to his wife. The Foster property did not go to auction. That was Adeline's decision, and Caleb hadn't argued. The 40 acres were hers, her father's work, her own 14 months of holding it together, and she wasn't going to let them go just because she'd married someone with 500. The properties ran alongside each other the way neighboring operations run, with the practical cooperation of two people who understood the same land and had separate claims on different parts of it. Liberty had the run of both and took advantage of this comprehensively, on one occasion removing Jesse's hat from a fence post and being found with it in the south pasture, showing no remorse whatsoever. Adeline kept managing the Whitmore Ranch accounts. By the end of the first year, she was managing the books for 2 neighboring operations besides charging fair wages, never undercharging. Caleb ran the 500 acres with the same patient attention he'd always brought to it, understanding that land gave back what you gave it, which was also more or less how he understood everything else. On an evening the second spring, sitting on the porch in the last light, Adeline looked at Liberty grazing in the near pasture and thought about a Monday afternoon in November, 2 hours until sundown, $4.40. And a white horse she'd ridden 12 minutes to the one man her father had trusted. She thought about $10 that had become an east bedroom, a reorganized pantry, a tool on a workbench, wildflowers in a kitchen window. A man who'd stood his ground against a lender's threats in December and only admitted it 2 months later because she'd made him. She thought about her father who'd left her a property, a horse, and one instruction. He hadn't said Caleb Whitmore would give her a home. He hadn't said Caleb Whitmore was the man she'd marry. He'd only said he'll treat the animal right. She thought about how right her father had been about the horse and about everything else. Caleb came out with 2 cups of coffee, sat beside her, handed her one. Liberty lifted his head from the grass, looked at them with the calm assessment of an animal that had known since November exactly where it belonged, then went back to grazing. Caleb, yes, my father knew, she said. He looked at Liberty, then at her. Yes, he said. I think he did. That autumn, Elias Thorne quietly closed his lending office in Stonebridge and moved on to try his arithmetic in some other county, having found, in the end, that a valley where the two largest operations stood shoulder to shoulder left considerably less room for a man who made his living finding people with nowhere else to turn. Nobody in Stonebridge much minded seeing him go. Adeline held her coffee in the Montana spring evening and looked at everything her father had left her, the property, the horse, the last instruction, and the man it had led her to, and thought he never wasted a word. Not one. It was, without question, exactly right. Adeline Foster rode to the Whitmore Ranch gate on a Monday afternoon in November with a white horse and a price that wasn't what the horse was worth. She was not selling the horse. She was following the last instruction her father gave her: take him to Caleb Whitmore, he'll treat the animal right, and he had. He'd treated the horse right and the accounts right and eventually Adeline right, which meant honestly, patiently, with the understanding that a woman who'd managed 40 acres alone for 14 months didn't need saving. She needed fair terms. She needed the terms to stay what they were until she was ready for them to be something else. She needed someone who would admit a consistent failing, offer genuine options instead of decisions already made, stand between her and a man with threats and papers without being asked, and still eventually ask next time. That is what love looks like when it's honest, not rescue, partnership, and a horse named Liberty who knew before either of them did.